Itali-Echo, Boston's only bilingual show, Italian-American show. Welcome back to my show. I'm your host, Viviana Dragani, and this is WNTN Radio Boston. Today, I am very excited to host Wayne Ambler, retired college professor who lived and taught in Rome for 10 years and later took students to Rome for short periods. He is now publishing a not-for-profit podcast called Get Ready for Rome. Welcome.
Grazie mille, Viviana. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm excited to speak with you and your community.
Piacere mio, grazie. So first things first, how did you become interested in Rome and Italy?
By accident, as a matter of fact, an accident that makes me think that maybe all roads do lead to Rome, because I was teaching in Dallas, Texas. Never been out of the country before. I had no expectation that I would be spending so much of my career centered around Rome and Italy, when all of a sudden the opportunity popped up for me to go and teach on the University of Dallas's Rome campus. And they have an unusual Rome program in which their entire sophomore class goes in halves, one in the fall and one in the spring, goes to Rome to study. So there's a group of 125 students, perhaps, every semester studying in Rome. And I had the chance to go and be one of their instructors. And this was an opportunity for me. It was a little bit difficult to make the decision for the family, because it meant my wife would have to give up her job. We'd have to pack up our two young daughters and go and accept a new kind of life. But we did it, and it turned out to be just a wonderful opportunity and adventure for us. I still remember when we landed in Rome, the excitement that I felt at that moment, and I quickly fell in love with the city and with the Italian people. And so one of my first goals on getting to Rome was to try to get the university, which had agreed to send me for 1 year, to get them to send me for a second year. And I achieved that goal. But when I asked for a third year, they said, no, you've got to come back to Irving, Texas and continue teaching on our home campus. But I remember on the flight back from Rome, I was already plotting the way in which to get ourselves reassigned from Texas to Rome. And I succeeded. Took a while to persuade my wife that this was the right family decision, but she happily came along, and we took our daughters back to Rome for 8.5 years after that, so a total of about 10 years. So it was a chance, but it was an opportunity that I seized. I fell in love with it. The way I made myself useful to the university so that they were willing to send me back was by accepting administrative responsibilities, which are a little bit harder for the university to fill. So I became the director and then the dean of the program. And this gave me the opportunity to try to think, how can Rome and how can Italy be a source for the education of our students? How can it be a bigger asset in the lives and educations of our students? And that's what's still motivating me as I do my podcast now that I'm in retirement, is how to use Rome as a way to improve the education of those people who might like such an education. So the short answer to your question is, how did I go to Rome? I went because of an accident and then an opportunity that I seized to the extent possible.
Thank you for sharing.
I'd be there now if I could. Back there now if that were possible. Yeah, I'd love to return.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. So what was your life like in Italy?
It was, it came with some hardships. And probably more for my wife than for me. I had my teaching job that consumed me, and my administrative responsibilities, which took a lot of my time. And she was the one who had to go, for example, to the Italian post office, which was never a happy experience.
No.
And some confusion. She had to do a little bit more of the driving in the local areas that we lived. And when we got there, we did not know any Italian, and we didn't really see this opportunity coming, so we weren't able to prepare for it. So I think things were a bit harder for her than for me. But I'd say that one thing that was certainly memorable for us is that one of our 10 years in Italy, we spent living in an old neglected villa that the university had arranged for us to inhabit in the Italian countryside with no Americans anywhere around. And so we became part of a group of Italians that had a nice social life. They were, if I can put it this way, without offense, simple people who welcomed us warmly, and we quickly loved them. So we had just some fantastic parties together. Every one of them seemed to make his own wine, and so they had cantinas in the basements of their home. We had parties where people danced the tango, and it was just quite wonderful. So you asked me what did I like about Italy. This was certainly a wonderful introduction to it, and we remain deeply grateful to Adele and Vincenzo that showed us the ropes, so to speak. I just could tell one brief incident when we wanted to show our appreciation for the hospitality that they'd shown us soon after we got there, and we invited them to our daughter's second birthday party, which was set up in a beautiful spot on this neglected villa under the spreading oak tree and a ceramic table and a big forno. And we prepared a little meal, and we invited Adele and Vincenzo and a couple other kids to come up. So at 1 o'clock, the official starting time for all Italian lunches, I looked around for them and they weren't there. And at 1:05, I looked, they weren't there. At 1:10, I'm looking down the lane that they would be walking up. And eventually I saw them walking up this lane. But it wasn't just the 4 people I was expecting. There were about 15 of them. And I thought, oh, my goodness, we only made so much pasta. What are we going to do? And Adele saw the look of concern on my face, and she said, non ti preoccupare. We've brought everything we need. So they completely took over the party. They got the grill going. They started popping the spumante bottles. And that was typical of the kind of hospitality that we enjoyed. It was quite wonderful. Gradually, I got to enjoy and appreciate the intellectual riches of Rome and its long and complex history. I acquired a taste for art that, frankly, I don't think I had before. So my first visit to the Borghese Gallery in Rome, with the beautiful Bernini statues and Caravaggio paintings, this was added a whole new element to my life. So these were some of the things that I enjoyed in Italy.
Thank you. And what is your podcast about?
Well, my podcast is about the latter category of things that I came to enjoy in Italy, namely the things that had some intellectual content. So I don't, in the podcast, aspire to teach people what restaurants to go to or, where to live in Rome. There are many other services that do that. I'm trying to help as best I can those people who visit Rome and want at least a little bit to learn something from their experience. And this is actually a large number of tourists. Not everyone goes only to eat, but they also go to the Sistine Chapel and they go to the Colosseum. And what I noticed when I was there, and I noticed with myself also, when I went to Rome, my first trip to the Roman Forum, I had no idea what I was looking at. It was a horrible experience. It was hot. So I'm standing out there in crowds of tourists, and I didn't know what this thing was that was in front of me, and they were poorly labeled. And so too in the Sistine Chapel or the Raphael rooms, there are tourists that stand there looking in their guidebooks, trying to learn a little bit about what they are seeing, or they're being herded along by tour guides at a rapid rate with facts coming boom, 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 boom. So my podcast, its first purpose is to help people who are going to Rome prepare for their trip so that they know something about what they're going to see. They can organize that experience and it will stick with them much more. If you know something about Michelangelo before you walk into the Sistine Chapel, you'll walk away from that Sistine Chapel with a richer understanding and one that will stick with you for a much longer period of time. So that's really the initial starting goal for the podcast. And I think it's an obvious point. We put a lot of time into choosing our hotel rooms, choosing plane tickets, but we should put more time into also learning about what we're planning to see so we can see it better. Same is true of a baseball game. If you go without knowing the rules, you're not going to enjoy it as much as if you go knowing the rules. And then the podcast has also sort of taken on a second purpose, and that is to be a little bit more precise about the history of Rome and some of its importance. So I do go into things probably in greater depth than some tourists would want on some occasions, but I noticed that Rome's 2,000 plus history, 2,000 year plus history is filled with interesting anecdotes, incidents, potential lessons from which we can learn. A particular example, I'm studying now the transition or transformation of Rome from a pagan empire into a Christian empire, which occurs especially in the 4th century. And so there's pagan Rome that's existed for 1,000 years, and for some reason, and they persecute the Christians for 250 years, and then somehow the Christians come out on top. And by the end of the 4th century begins with them being persecuted. The 4th century ends with the Christians ruling the empire and making paganism illegal. So there's major culture wars that occur at that period. And I think that these can also help enlighten us in some of the culture wars that we're experiencing in our day. They're not quite so great, but still are significant. So those are two main goals of the podcast.
Very interesting. Thank you very much for this podcast. I listened to a couple of episodes. It's really, really interesting. And how can our audience listen to your podcast?
Well, it's carried on all major podcast carriers such as Stitcher and Google and Apple. And it's also available on social media. You can see references to it. I also have a website called getreadyforrome.com. So if anyone's interested, they should have no difficulty whatsoever finding their way to the podcast and to the website.
Great. So just search Get Ready for Rome. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. My pleasure. Thank you.
Un piacere. Ciao, arrivederci.
Ciao, ciao, arrivederci. Buona giornata.